By now, we've all seen the old man from the Breath of the Wild, where he appears to be guiding Link throughout his adventure. But who is this old man, and what is his purpose? Let's explore. First, a brief background on the old man in the Breath of the Wild. Link's first encounter with the old man occurs after he emerges from the Shrine of Resurrection. The old man introduces himself as a strange old man and informs Link that they are on the Great Plateau, which is the birthplace of the entire kingdom of Hyrule, and points to the abandoned Temple of Time. Link next encounters the old man after he uses the Sheikah Slate to reactivate the Resurrection Tower, where the old man tells him about the atrocity swarming around Hyrule Castle, which is Calamity Ganon, and states that the Calamity Ganon brought ruin and corruption upon the kingdom of Hyrule 100 years ago. The old man also tells Link that he can't get off the Great Plateau unless he has a paraglider, and tells Link that he will trade the paraglider for the treasure that Link finds in the nearby shrine. The old man also appears at Mount Helios Peak to teach Link about the Sheikah Slate's scoping ability, and also gives Link a quilted shirt as a reward for ascending the mountain. After Link completes the shrine Ki no Mut, he is met outside by the old man, who eventually tells Link that in order to get the paraglider, he must complete all 4 shrines on the Great Plateau. Finally, we've also seen the old man hiding behind the tree in the opening trailer. Thus, the old man in the Breath of the Wild acts as a guide to Link, helping him maneuver around the terrain in the Great Plateau, and also giving Link the quilted shirt and the paraglider, which Link needs in order to get off the Great Plateau. As I will show, I believe the inclusion of the old man in the Breath of the Wild is a tribute to the old man from the original Legend of Zelda game, because there are simply too many similarities both between the old man in the Breath of the Wild and the old man in the original Legend of Zelda, as well as similarities between the two games themselves. I suppose it's also possible that the old man in the Breath of the Wild may actually be the old man from the original Legend of Zelda, both in a symbolic sense and in a canonical sense, which presumably would put the game in the downfall timeline. But I think a more likely scenario is that the inclusion of the old man in the Breath of the Wild is simply an homage to the old man in the original Legend of Zelda, just as the game itself appears to be a symbolic or spiritual successor to the original Legend of Zelda game, as will be shown. Before looking at the similarities between the old man in the Breath of the Wild and the old man in the original Legend of Zelda, let's take a look at the similarities between the two games themselves. First, the most obvious example is the fact that both games appear to be vast, open-world games with a ton of exploration. Indeed, Nintendo has been open about this from the very first footage they showed off in E3 from 2014, and only added to that in its 2016 E3, where one of the Treehouse Live segments actually covered the connections between the Breath of the Wild and the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. Second, there seems to be an overworld versus underworld component in both games. If we look at the original Legend of Zelda manual, it talks about the labyrinths, i.e. the dungeons, being located underground. Sound familiar? Well, while we haven't seen any dungeons yet, we know that the shrines, which have been described as mini-dungeons, are also located underground, as can clearly be seen from the visuals. 3. As we know, the Guardians are based off of Octoroks from the original Legend of Zelda game. Interestingly, there were 2 types of Octoroks, blue and red, in the original Legend of Zelda game. Similarly, there are 2 types of Guardians, regular-sized ones found in the land, and mini Guardians found in the shrines. 4. Both games feature a rod that can shoot fire beams. We've seen this very plainly in the Breath of the Wild, with the fire rod. In the original Legend of Zelda game, there was an item called the Magical Rod, or Magical Wand, which could shoot beams when combined with the Book of Magic. 5th, in both games, Link has the ability to either freeze or slow down time. In the original Legend of Zelda game, we had the magical clock, where enemies were frozen in time, and the enemy would stop moving when Link used this item. In Breath of the Wild, we have what's called the Flurry Rush, which allows you to enter a slow motion type state, which can be used by evading enemies' attacks. Slow motion can also be initiated by jumping off of a high ledge and pulling out your bow and arrow. 6th, both games feature a raft. Of course, the raft was first introduced in the original Legend of Zelda, and it's back in full swing in the Breath of the Wild. 7th, In both games, you can burn bushes. We've seen the destruction and mayhem one can create using the fire rod in the Breath of the Wild. In the original Legend of Zelda game, we could burn bushes to find secrets. Finally, both games feature poultry. That's right, meat. In the original one, it was used to lure the enemy, so it was more of a bait. In the Breath of the Wild, the seared steak can be used to recover hearts. Now that we've covered the similarities between the games themselves, let's take a look at the similarities between the Old Man in the Breath of the Wild and the Old Man in the original Legend of Zelda. First, in both games, the Old Man provides Link with an important item, the paraglider in the Breath of the Wild, which we will need to get off the Great Plateau, and the wooden sword in the original Legend of Zelda game, which we can later upgrade. Thus, in both games, the Old Man is worried about our safety and is trying to help us by giving us an item necessary for our adventure. Second, in both games, the Old Man is present in multiple locations. In Breath of the Wild, we've seen him in many different locations throughout the Great Plateau, and in the original Legend of Zelda game, the Old Man is in the cave in the beginning, as well as being placed in various other places in some of the dungeons throughout the game. Third, in both games, the Old Man tells us that we can obtain or upgrade an item in-game if we complete a certain task. In the original Legend of Zelda, the Old Man tells us that if we master using our previous sword, by beating 2 dungeons or having gathered 2 heart containers, he will upgrade our previous sword. Similarly, in Breath of the Wild, the Old Man tells us that if we complete the 4 shrines, we can obtain the paraglider. Fourth, in both games, the Old Man helps us improve our health. In the original Legend of Zelda, the Old Man will offer us either the red medicine or a heart container to help us on our quest. Of course, in Breath of the Wild, we increase our hearts, not heart containers, by gathering and eating food, and the Old Man allows us to eat his baked apples, which in turn will help us regain our health, to the extent necessary. Fifth, in both games, the Old Man has a sense of humor. The Old Man in the original Legend of Zelda game asks us to pay him for the door repair charge, since we presumably broke his door without permission and entered his house. The Old Man in the Breath of the Wild jokes that we can't just steal his baked apple. Finally, in both games, the Old Man gives us helpful advice on achieving our goals in our adventure. The Old Man in the original Legend of Zelda gives us helpful advice about conquering certain enemies and bosses in dungeons, like using bombs on the dongos. The Old Man in Breath of the Wild gives us advice on using our Sheikah Slate, and it remains to be seen what other advice he will give us throughout the entire game. As we can see, there are a lot of similarities which point to the Breath of the Wild being almost a spiritual successor to the original Legend of Zelda. Based on everything we've covered, I believe the Old Man from the Breath of the Wild is simply a tribute to the Old Man from the original Legend of Zelda. Thus, they share more of a symbolic connection rather than an actual one, just as Breath of the Wild itself appears to have more of a symbolic connection with and is a spiritual successor to the original Legend of Zelda game, rather than an actual one in terms of timeline placement. In fact, Nintendo has been very guarded about the story of the game, providing as little detail as possible and not showing any towns or NPCs other than the Old Man, so as not to spoil the game. Yet, they were openly touting the game's connections to the original Legend of Zelda game, which is another pointer that seems to support the conclusion that both the Old Man and the games themselves are connected with each other in a symbolic sense. Those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Who do you guys think the Old Man is, and what is his purpose? I'd love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments. Also, thank you for watching this video. Please do not forget to hit the like button, share with family and friends, and subscribe to our channel, Gagz Gaming.